4:31 p.m. The Boeing 747 that will become TWA Flight 800 to Paris arrives at JFK. It's 25 years old and has more than 16,000 flights under its belt. Tanker trucks move in to fuel up the plane. The ground crew pumps 114,000 liters of Jet A fuel into the 6 wing tanks. It's more than enough to fly to Paris. The biggest tank, the center wing tank, can stay as it is, almost empty. 6 p.m. 212 passengers board Flight 800 in good time for a 7 p.m. takeoff. In charge of the crew this evening is Captain Stephen Snyder. With 4,700 hours of flying time on 747s, he's one of TWA's most experienced pilots. Flying alongside Snyder is Captain Ralph Kevorkian, another TWA veteran. 7 p.m. Captain Snyder and the flight crew are ready to go. But there's a problem. One of the passengers is not on board, but her bags are already in the hold. The plane is delayed while ground staff hunt for the missing passenger. Outside, it's 28 degrees Celsius, and on the asphalt of the apron, the jumbo is getting hot. As the minutes tick by, air conditioning units under the fuselage keep the passengers cool. At 7:59 p.m., gate personnel contact the crew.
TWA Flight 800, sorry about that delay. We have confirmation that the passenger is on board. They were on board the whole time.
8:19. At last, Captain Kevorkian throttles up the 747. Flight 800 lifts off an hour and 20 minutes late. TWA 800's flight path will take it through some of the most congested airspace in the USA. It will also skirt the boundary of a US military zone to the south. Air traffic control keeps flights well clear of any restricted airspace during weapons testing.
TWA 800, heavy New York departure, radar contact, climb and maintain 11,000.
.31. Flight 800 climbs into the evening sky. Eastwind Airlines pilot David McLean is flying a 737 into Trenton, New Jersey. He sees the jumbo jet ahead of him.
It was a nice night, good visibility.
Air traffic control clears Flight 800 to climb to its next level.
TWA 800, heavy turn left heading 050, vector climbing around traffic.
Climb to 15,000.
Crew and passengers settle in for the flight. Then, suddenly... Eastwind's pilot David McLean reports in to air traffic control.
Just saw an explosion out here, about 16,000 feet. Just went down into the water.
Air traffic control tries to raise Flight 800 on the radio.
TWA 800, if you hear center, ident.
There's no response.
TWA 800, if you hear center, ident.
The terrible truth starts to dawn.
TWA 800, center.
First on the scene is the Air National Guard rescue helicopter. The sea below them is on fire. A small armada of 40 Coast Guard boats plus police and civilian craft joins the search. In the darkness, rescuers scan the wreckage for signs of life. 9:30 p.m. The news is filtering back to staff on the ground at JFK. TWA begins to contact relatives of the crew and check the list of passengers. Meanwhile, reports of the disaster start to break on the news channels. 5 a.m. The sun rises on an ocean littered with the remains of Flight 800. Boat crews bring pieces of wreckage to the Coast Guard station at East Mauritius. Rescuers have recovered 73 bodies, but no survivors. News reaches the FBI and New York Assistant Director James Kallstrom. Kallstrom immediately suspects the crash is no accident.
My gut told me that this was probably an intervention by some criminal, some terrorist.
Pilots who were near the jet when it exploded tell FBI agents that the blast came out of the blue. But witnesses on the ground report something highly suspicious. Over time, 258 people tell the FBI they saw something streaking through the sky at the moment the 747 was lost. 2 people even caught an image on camera. One photo shows a mysterious trail in the sky. The other appears to show an object shaped like a missile. Kallstrom faces a horrifying possibility. Was Flight 800 shot down by a terrorist missile? Such an attack just a few kilometers off the US mainland would represent a new escalation of the terror threat facing America and the West. The US supplied shoulder-held ground-to-air missile launches to Islamic freedom fighters in Afghanistan. Kallstrom knows that many of these weapons are now in the hands of terrorists determined to strike at America. But the launches only have a range of 8 kilometers. Since Flight 800 came down 13 kilometers from land, a missile of this type could only have been fired from the interview 670 eyewitnesses. They painstakingly check the movements of 20,000 craft in the area. They seize stolen and abandoned boats and run forensic tests on them. But they can't find any promising leads. Then the missile theory takes a new and astonishing turn. Stories and rumors begin to circulate on the internet and in the press. They make an extraordinary allegation that TWA Flight 800 was shot down not by terrorists, but in a terrible accident by the US military. The FBI knows that Flight 800 did skirt the edge of an active military weapons fire zone, Whiskey 105, an area of several thousand square kilometers south of Long Island. The Navy routinely uses it for training exercises and on occasion does fire missiles at special airborne targets. Could one have struck Flight 800 in a catastrophic targeting error? The FBI's James Kallstrom goes straight to the top at the Pentagon.
So I had a conversation the next day with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Shalikashvili, and told him that we were going to need the absolute cooperation of all the military services.
Kallstrom learns that there were 8 military ships, 8 submarines, and 5 military planes within 550 kilometers of the crash site. A P-3 plane and a sub were in the middle of training exercises. He orders dozens of FBI agents to scrutinize all their logs. After weeks of checking, they verify that no missiles were unaccounted for. No missiles were fired that night. Since the day after the crash, Navy divers have scoured the debris zone in the deep waters off Long Island. It's slow and dangerous work. The seabed is littered with razor-sharp fragments. 6 days into the search, and there's no sign of the black boxes. It's possible that ocean currents have buried them in the sand. Then, on day 7, a diver spots something. A flash of orange.
The cockpit voice recorder. That's it. You see the beacon right on it? You want to take a picture of it? Right.
It's the cockpit voice recorder. Within seconds, they get lucky again. The flight data recorder lies just meters away.
They got both of them? Holy cow!
Divers quickly bring the boxes to the surface. To prevent damage by oxidation, they keep them submerged in salt water. But there's a problem. The boxes are twisted and broken open from the massive impact. Investigators fear that there's little chance the tapes inside will have survived, but they rush them to NTSB headquarters. There they hope they can retrieve something from the recorders. They carefully analyze all the pilot's conversations and the readings from the data recorder.
Stop climb at 13,000. And the electric?
They scour the last seconds of the recording for any clues to the plane's sudden loss.
Climb to 15,000.
But at 8:31 and 12 seconds, the recording cuts off suddenly. Whatever happened to Flight 800, the pilots had no time to react. The excitement of the find turns to bitter disappointment.
The voice recorder, and the same with the data recorder, really told us nothing.
Now the investigators must rely entirely on the salvaged wreckage of the doomed jet for clues. Every fragment of the plane must be brought back to shore so that they can study it in detail. Week after week, Navy salvage ships work to recover every piece of TWA 800. NTSB teams scrutinize the debris as it's lifted from the ocean. They load the wreckage onto flatbed lorries and drive it 32 kilometers to a hangar in Calverton, New York. Here, investigators analyze the debris for any trace of explosives. If Flight 800 was brought down by a bomb or a missile, it would leave evidence behind. NTSB metallurgists examine the fragments under scanning electron microscopes. They're looking for the distinctive micro-pitting which high explosive leaves on metal surfaces. As a veteran of the Pan Am 103 investigation, metallurgist Jim Wildey knows exactly what bomb damage looks like. But he finds no trace of it.
We looked at every piece, every square inch of every piece, every fracture, every surface. Each piece as it came in was examined in detail for evidence of a bomb or explosion, and there simply was no evidence of that type on the TWA aircraft.
6 months after the disaster, the FBI has found no evidence of a missile strike or terrorist bomb. Now the NTSB focuses on catastrophic mechanical failure as the likely cause of the crash. It takes them 3 months to complete the center section. The fuselage is riddled with fractures. To trace where the plane's breakup started, Wildey first needs to calculate the sequence of the fractures.
All of these early fractures stem from one location, and that was right here in the fuselage, just in front of the front spar, near the bottom of the airplane.
The fracture sequence allows Wildey to work out how the plane broke up. The fractures underneath the plane radiate out, tearing away part of the belly of the plane. With the bottom of the fuselage gone, new fractures race upwards on both sides of the jumbo jet. When they meet, the nose is torn away from the rest of the plane. Now Wildey must find what triggered the initial fracturing. Investigators examine the fueling records at JFK. They find that the ground crew left Flight 800's center wing tank almost empty, with just 190 liters of Jet A fuel in it. That's just a puddle in the bottom. It seems a small amount of fuel to cause such extensive damage. But Wildey knows that Jet A fuel has unusual properties, as this footage, taken at Federal Aviation Authority testing labs, shows. In its liquid state, Jet A fuel is not highly flammable. But when it's enclosed in a tank and heated up, it vaporizes, becoming easy to ignite. Now investigators must discover whether the fuel in Flight 800's center wing tank could have been heated to flashpoint. They know that right underneath the center wing tank lie the plane's air conditioning packs. They produce cool, breathable cabin air using hot air taken from the jet engines.
So we have this extremely hot air, hot enough to cook a chicken, within inches of the bottom of the tank itself.
Investigators calculate that the flash point of the fuel in the center wing tank would be remarkably low, just 35.8 degrees Celsius. Could the air conditioners have heated the fuel enough to reach this critical temperature? To find out, NTSB and FAA scientists mount an audacious experiment to restage Flight 800. They fill the center wing tank of a 747 with 189 liters of Jet A fuel and fit it with 90 temperature sensors. The plane sits on the tarmac with the air conditioning on for 2 hours and 45 minutes. Then the 747 takes off. It follows the same ascent profile as Flight 800. It's a calculated risk, but no greater than thousands of planes undergo every day. 12 minutes later, it reaches 4,200 meters, the point at which TWA 800 exploded. Investigators examine the readings from the temperature sensors. What they find horrifies them. The temperature in the center wing tank is 53 degrees Celsius, a full 17 degrees past the fuel's flash point.
The test flight conclusively showed that the center wing tank had become flammable.
To confirm that it could cause a blast strong enough to rupture the reinforced aluminium center wing tank, engineers build a 1/4 scale model. They fill it with jet fuel vapor. Then they ignite it. The force of the blast is more than enough to rupture the tank. But investigators are mystified about what might have ignited the fuel vapor. They know there were 7 in-flight fuel tank explosions in the previous 33 years. All were triggered by dramatic events such as lightning strikes, sabotage, or even an engine falling off. Bob Swaim investigates these and dozens more potential ignition sources. He concludes that the ignition source must be something electrical inside the fuel tank. Wires run from the cockpit to fuel probes inside the center wing tank.
The wiring crosses near the top of the fuel tank, routed to the terminal block, as you see here.
Swaim studies the terminal block. He discovers that it has dangerously sharp edges.
And it was sharp and hard enough that it could cut through the insulation of the wiring.
Swaim suspects there may well have been an exposed wire in the fuel tank. That could create a dangerous spark. But there's a puzzle. The wires inside the fuel tank are designed to carry a very low voltage, too low to cause a spark. Swaim follows the fuel probe wires outside the fuel tank. Here they join high voltage wires for the cabin lights and other aircraft systems which run in bundles through the belly of the 25-year-old plane. He looks more closely at the surviving wiring on the crashed 747 and on other jumbo jets of a similar age and makes a disturbing discovery.
We were shocked by the condition of the wiring we found.
Swaim finds the remains of fluid spills and sharp metal shavings among the bundles of wire. He also finds chafed wires, wires repaired with tape, and even some with cracked insulation. He concludes that the poor state of wiring on older 747s could allow high voltage electricity to jump into the fuel tank wires. It could then pass into the fuel tank, causing a short circuit. The resulting spark would ignite the fuel vapor.
Climb the 15,000.
But as they replay the tape, investigators hear something intriguing. Just before the recording cuts off, there are two minuscule pauses. They're each just 2 microseconds long. But they're telltale signs of a momentary loss of power to the recorder. It's an astounding discovery. The pause in the recording backs the investigators' theory that there was a short circuit on Flight 800. And it could happen on any one of 1,200 other 747s in service around the world. It's the final piece of the puzzle. Investigators now know the probable chain of events that triggered the loss of TWA Flight 800. What tore apart a 300-ton jumbo jet just 12 minutes into a routine flight and left 230 passengers and crew seconds from disaster? Boeing implements the FAA orders and also introduces fuel tank inerting, a system that tops up fuel tanks with nitrogen, preventing jet fuel from catching fire. The first commercial jumbo jet, fitted with an inerting system, rolled out in the summer of 2005. And starting from 2007, all new Boeing 7 Series planes will feature the new technology.